This is my second podcast, and I have a hypertension and all that kind of pessimistic stuff. But I'm going to try to be as hyper as I can be. I'm going to try to be as Indian as I can be in my English because I know if I speak in Hindi for a podcast, it's just going to take away a lot of viewers. And if I speak in a very should I say happy English, then that again will be a problem for many people. So the middle path is I go with this language. So today I'm going to go ahead and try to tell you about a lot of books that I've read in the past 10, 15 years. And what I'm going to do is, so this is like the one thing that I've been doing for decades reading, and I don't want to promote it too much because I have published about 10 books so people can guess that I do read and write. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with travel because that's the kind of stuff that I like to read. I don't like I never like to read fiction. Once I got hold of the language, which is English, from fiction, reading Goosebumps, Noddy, and that kind of stuff when I was very, very young in my school library. I started to read a lot of non-fiction, and that did not begin certainly until I passed out of school in class 12. So there is a steep learning curve that's going to get worse because as we grow older, our kids are dumber. Something we learn over time. I'm not trying to promote Park Avenue, but that's how it is. So yeah, so for travel, I think everybody's looked at stuff like, and I did, like Sky Scanner and all that stuff for discounted deals. The other day I was reading about some guy from Gujarat who was able to travel throughout Switzerland for about 10 days in 70,000 rupees, and he's given the itinerary and how well, I looked at it as well, and there's a lot of talk about parochialism, about not spending the money that you earn outside your country, despite having earned in dollars. Well, I don't promote that, but I can't go against that either in some ways. So does that mean I don't donate? I do. So there are a lot of YouTube videos on that, traveling and all that stuff. The best book I can recommend, and it's a series, and that's why it took so long. It's called The Traveler's Literary Companion. You can find the best one on in that series from Israel. You'll find two amazing short stories. I read the first book in that series of India at a secondhand bookshop, and that India book had amazing selections. So I thought that why not read foreign ones. It's goddamn costly, but that's the kind of stuff you'll get. That's the kind of information you'll get. It's very okay to spend $1,000 on that kind of a paperback. Trust me, it's really good. Vienna, there's no Copenhagen, but there is, I think, Czech Republic's Prague, and all that stuff. Don't read, obviously, since this is English and English Spanish kind of a publication. Don't go for non-English countries, especially now, such as Russia or China, in that kind of a genre. You won't find the good stuff there. Next, I think uh, there's this amazing book called The 14 Dalai Lamas. It's a very short book, maybe 400 pages, paperback, max 500 pages. Why it's so important to read on China today, and that also on Tibet, especially if you're Indian, not Indian, American, then you're automatically onto the Chinese. The Dalai Lama is one of the most difficult situations to handle right now. And if you read Merritt Rulin, that's a research scholar. He's from America. He's the student of Robert Greenberg, who's done a lot of work on languages, which isn't certainly my only thing that I read on. So don't think that I'm giving something too wild. This guy is talked about the fact that the Chinese languages are Dean Caucasian, which means that once upon a time, what they spoke, the Caucasians actually was followed up by the Chinese, and they've preserved it in some way. I don't know how you're going to take that. And this is an extrapolation, but do your own stuff if you don't like it. Chinese, Tibet, Sino-Tibetan, read the 14 Dalai Lamas. It's an amazing book. It's a very concise book. In order to understand languages, because I have picked up on it so severely, and I did a Hindi podcast on Russia and Chinese. The best thing I can tell you is just learn four scripts if you have the time. One is Arabic, so or Urdu or whatever you want to, one of those, Persian. All three are the same scripts. You can calligraphy it into Cook Friend, Nastaliq and all that, but actually it's just the same script. Learn the ABCD of Arabic, learn the ABCD of Mandarin, learn the ABCD of Cyrillic or Kyrillic, which is Russian, and learn the script of Latin. You can get by without Greek, which is much more expensive to print anyway. Once you get these four scripts in your head, trust me, enlightenment is far away back behind. Dots and Lines, Giant Kaikini. This is an amazing book. It's a short story collection. It's the favorite book of Aravind Adiga, who wrote the Booker Prize winning book. The White Tiger. I don't read fiction. I read him. I loved it. It's an extraordinary book, extraordinary amount of energy flowing through there. And yes, since the epidemic came, it's not that good a book anymore because now it doesn't make that much sense. But there is this guy called Nikhil Adiga or someone who's written a very good short story collection. I haven't read it, and I don't know. He might be related to him because he's this guy who talked about Mangalore and that kind of a lifestyle. South Indian goes off, migrates to America, does the tech stuff, and comes back. If you want to read tech books, technology, AI, all that stuff, including the main book on AI Genesis after Turing is Peter somebody Peter Russell, I think, or someone like that, who's written the main book on AI. All of that you'll find at subsidized cost on Schroff publication. The Mantle of the Prophet, completely diametrically Lalit Modi Li, opposite direction, is this book on Iran. It's a secular look at the revolution, The Mantle of the Prophet. And you can read that book. It's an amazing book. It tells you how the things happened all over the place after the 1970s when the Ayatollah of uh, Ruholi Ruhollah Khamenei took over. He actually belongs to Barabanki, maybe about 150 kilometers from here. He was from a small village here. He went there. I wrote a research paper on the next Ayatollah, and with all due respect and with his eminence in there. Uh, you know, read him. There's a research essay I wrote on it. Journey to the Holy Land by Munshirul Hasan. Munshirul Hasan is this guy from India. He's been translated. He did translate this book. This is a book on going to the Hajj, the pilgrimage, the sacred Islamic sites, Mecca and Medina. And it's written in English, in Roman, amazing, good to read. He had a car crash around Jaipur before the COVID struck. My father was still around at that point of time. And I remember telling him about the book, which he had also looked at. He didn't read it, but I mean, that guy's gone now. Yeah, but this is an amazing book. You can read all about how and what happens there, despite the YouTube showing you all of that stuff with, white clothes and he's going in there and looking at, the perfumes. It's not the same thing. Read it and you'll understand why. Xi Jinping, The Governance of China. That's an amazing series of books officially published in Mandarin by the Chinese CCP. There are about 4 or 5 books in the series. I've read the first one. It's okay. There isn't that much propaganda. Counterintuitively, the next book I want to talk about is a book I gifted to a Bhubaneswar-based professor in architecture. The name of the author, he's German, is Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse, maybe he's most famous for Siddhartha, which is a book on the life of Gautam Buddha. But I think the real book by Hermann Hesse is not that, not Joseph and His Brothers, which again is a translation available by John Woods. I had a look at it. I didn't like it that much. I could foretell what was happening in there because there was a talk of wells right at the beginning. Tell by tell, I mean, small hills, kind of mounds made, in the Syriac area and era. So Herman Hesse has written this book called The Glass Bead Game. Amazing, extraordinary. Read it, 300-400 pages. It'll just blow you off with the kind of stuff he'll expose you to. I.K. Temini, The Science of Yoga. Again, one of the most extraordinary and life-changing books I've read in my life. It's published by the Theosophical Society of Adyar in South India. The guy is a professor of chemistry in Allahabad. I don't know if he's still alive, but it's not a Congress book. It's not a book by a Muslim about Hinduism. Trust me, it's a very deep book written by a Sanskrit guy. He's done it really well. That kind of English hasn't come out in decades in India. That kind of stuff and research hasn't happened for decades. And I mean, Patanjali by Ramdev isn't anything on it because it's diametrically opposite to the political scenario. So I'm not even going to try to talk about it. Ayush medicine, if you're interested in Ayurveda, Unani, and all that kind of stuff, read my book on it. I'm not trying to promote my book here only. Sorry, not at all. Is because you'll find the name of a book called Planetary Herbology by Michael Tierra. This guy has done an extraordinary job of combining all the traditional systems of medicine of the past 2000 years into one simple single book. He's from, I think, Latin America, maybe Brazil or Argentina. Next guy I want to talk about, and this is about Chinese. If you followed me up in the past few minutes ago when I was talking about the Chinese logic of learning 4 scripts and all that. So CJKV, that's Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, along with their Tang and Cantonese pronunciation are in one simple single Kindle PDF. You can pick it up. It's 1,80,000 words in there. That's the best you can do. with the kind of money that we can make. And yes, there has been an upgrade over it. Now they're trying to include Mongolian into it. I don't know how successful they are. It's not been published yet. I have checked, and so this is the textbook CJKV. Next, I want to talk about Zia Haider Rahman. He is one of the two Bangladeshi authors I'm going to talk about. Zia Haider Rahman has written a book called In Light of What We Know. Amazing, extraordinary, very pithy. Every chapter has a quote, and it's thought about for maybe, all his life. He traveled all across the world from Britain after being from a remote location in Bangladesh, born to good parents, and his family, extended family, all met with accidents. He said that on an official BBC or some kind of typical stiff neck British show. And he's a banker. Yes, he's a banker, and this is an extraordinary book. The other book that I could tell you about from the Bangladesh area is this guy who's written called a book called Right to Passage, travels through India, Pakistan and Iran. Amazing book. You can find it. It's by Sage Publication, Indian publisher. Next book I want to talk about is Dreaming in Chinese by Deborah Fallows, probably the first book that is Western enough, American. She talked about her stay learning Pinyin or was Cantonese in China, and she's talked about very insightful, small, typical American kind of knickknacks, which you won't find anywhere else. Karan Thapar, I think he's the best journalist in India. Undisputedly, I'm not a fan of any other English or Hindi anchor or speaker. I think Karan Thapar's best book is, and probably the only book I have read, to be very, very honest, is More Salt Than Pepper. I haven't read the rest of the stuff because I have been following him religiously for the past 10, 15 years on YouTube and stuff. Itzhak Bentov is a Polish author. He's written a book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. Amazing, extraordinary, scintillating. He's written about the fact much before how micro gestures control the DNA, control the I Ching, control the abstract world. It's extraordinary. He wrote it in about 1970s, 80s, before the Berlin Wall fell. He's Polish. This is a spiritual book. The source and how I got to it was Jana Dixon, another spiritual author who's written a book called Biology of Kundalini. Very controversial. I don't know if you are Hindu or not. If you are not, then it's just something that will flare everybody in the non-laity stuff. But if you are Hindu, you should have a look at that book. It's overpriced in the sense for India because it's 2,500 rupees per book paperback. You could get a Kindle probably by now. I don't know. I bought that book very long back, and I don't want to admit it, but I looked at the website which has 70% of the data, and I did a print of it because I was, a college going guy with very little money. Don't pirate. The next book is Soul Mountain. This is by a Chinese author. He's won a prize. This is the translation name. You should have a look at it. It's a very good book if you want to understand the layman aristocrat in some way in the CCP area. And talking about divination and all that in Chinese. Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses by James Joyce, staple reading if you want to understand Irish. Go to further things like Gaelic and ruins and all that kind of old language stuff if you are interested. But reading Joyce is very important. You'll have to look up the internet for so many annotations, so many meanings that he has in these books. It'll take you months to go through them. It took me weeks at least. The reason it took me weeks and not you, and not like you, months, is because I was just trying to dream through it, and I did read a lot of previous books. I have a bachelor's in English literature. Theosophical Society Adyar has a lot of books, lots of books, which make a lot of sense, dry, accurate, good translations of Sanskrit into English in the correct way. And you should even visit that place if you like it. I'm a fan, I am a member, I know the lodge. I don't practice, I don't go there a lot. And it's got nothing to do with magic at all, or any kind of funny stuff, even if you're American and it doesn't make sense and Ku Klux Klan. Okay, anyway, Breaking Open the Head is another amazing book. When I was in college, I was introduced to drugs and all that, and it broke my life for a few years. I wasn't dependent on anything. I didn't do anything more than cannabis, which is probably legal by now, and even in America. But yeah, that's how I picked up Ayurveda, which uses this as a base, like alcohol in allopathy. So if you want to read this book called Breaking Open the Head, Aerovid's Vault is a website where you'll find a lot of stuff on what happens, how does it happen, and all that cuckoo clucks, or rather poo stuff that Elon Musk is doing. Sorry. Exit One by Ishan Marvel. This is a guy I know. He's written about, all that stuff, acid and all that. I would recommend the book because I know him, but I've met him only 3 or 4 times through a friend. They are all Mount Carmelites. I'm not. I'm from a different school, but they're good friends. Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett, best British author in fiction. If you want to read as Discworld, you'll know so much more than just the humor. which will take you for an amazing ride. And it cost me back by maybe 30,000 rupees, but I actually bought the whole pack. I'm not advertising, I'm just saying it's actually that goddamn worth it. I don't buy that many books anymore. Neil Gaiman, again, this British author, has written extraordinary books. If you want, go through them. If you don't like him, read the sample beforehand. You will figure it out in a second if you like him. He has this typical flow, just like Terry Pratchett. Right. Then Umberto Eco, Foucault's Pendulum, instead of the Name of the Rose, there's a book on, sorry, there's a movie on by Sean Connery and all that. I don't like that book that much. This is the book you like. Foucault's Pendulum is extraordinary, really good book. Thomas Pynchon has written a book called Gravity's Rainbow. Again, very dense post World War kind of a book, written during those hippie eras of 70s, 80s, Technicolor, Hollywood movies with Al Pacino and all that. If you want to go into sci-fi, Neil Stephenson, read all of it. Not because Bill Gates talks about it. It's actually the most intelligent fiction I've read in my life. Maybe there's this one more guy who's talked about synesthesia, some Skinner guy, who's written a book called The Mirror. That's the only book that could come somewhere near Neil Stephenson. And all of his stuff is amazing. Werner Winge has written a book called Rainbow's End, and it's the only science fiction book I've liked more than Neil Stephenson because of the ideas in there more than how he's written it. There's a Chinese author called Cixin Liu who's written a lot of books. His most famous book is The Three Body Problem. There's a Netflix series on it. Don't watch movies, watch the books. Despite the COVID and the hicks and the heart problems, it's just a good idea to go slow if you really want to learn a lot broadly, orthodoxly. Either way, trust me. Oranges in the Sun is a West Asian anthology of Gulf countries, books, short stories put into one by a British author. Amazing. Azazil is a traditional Arabic book translated. Amazing. It's Syrian or Libyan. And then there's Aunt Sophia and his monastery, which is again a very amazing book. It's about a Greek monk who ends up in some place and then his adventures. It's been awarded. Both these books have been awarded by the Arabic Fiction, award, big thing on Wikipedia. An Uncertain Grace by Nissi Neen is the last probably science fiction book I've read. It's about a tutor whose student or his daughter, I'm sorry, I don't remember, goes into virtual space, becomes a real woman to him and all that kind of stuff. It's slightly erotic. And, I don't know if people like to think about all that outside of America, that whole Canada porn angle, but it does make sense that virtuality thing did make sense. The erotic thing didn't. Palestine Walks, again, completely diametrically opposite, is by Raja Shehzadeh. This is a book that talks about the Palestine issue much before it blew up 2 years, 1 year ago. All these books are available on Amazon, link that I provided below. Please have a look at it there. Don't worry, it's all there. I'm sorry if there's a lot of personal, private shopping material in there. Forgive me. An anthology of Chinese literature in 2 volumes. Again, the best stuff you can do to rapidly read Chinese literature. Then there's the Anchor Book of Chinese Poetry. That's the best anthology you can pick up for the non-prose stuff. And Equal Music by Vikram Seth. I think I'm in real extraordinary love with Vikram Seth, despite him being able to be carnal about it to me. Even if I someday I reach him, which would spook me out. I'm very sorry for being controversial, but An Equal Music is one of the most perfect books I've read. I love structures. I love classical music, and even though I'm not too big a fan of Western classical, this is the book you want to understand if you want to understand things in a a stiff octave kind of stuff. Four Seasons in Rome by Anthony Doerr. This is the book, the last book. For decades, I'd been reading. This is the book I was reading when COVID struck. Amazing book. This guy, American, with his twin sons, goes to Rome, stays there for a year, and all about it. Really cool book, even if you're not American. Kal Chakra Dasha is then again diametrically opposite about astrology, and it's something that is very core, very difficult to Indian astrology. So the best book on it is by a guy called Shakti Mohan Singh. He's from Jaipur. He's written an extraordinary book. How to read this kind of an ephemeris is in there. First Contact is a book that I gifted to one of my friends. She's South Indian and all that, but this guy grew up in the Indian Air Force stations, and he's South Indian, and he had this kind of a wasting disease of the flesh, and it made a lot of sense to me. She's hyper and all that, so I gave her that book. She's just crossing her mid ages. I know it's trouble for them, and so is for me. Uh, Disappearing into Flight by Asaf Sultanzadeh, the best book after Raja Shehzadeh. Uh, this is not West Asia. Remember, this is Afghanistan, much closer to India, much more intimate to us. Unsuitable Boy by Karan Johar, despite all the, typical intellectual stuff that I've told you about in these books, or so I assume, this guy has written a very simple book. But if you can go into the depth, figure out the French and the English, this actually is a very intellectual book. And this guy is, done all that coffee with Karan stuff. And no, I'm not homosexual. The Discomfort of Evening, again, extraordinary book. This is by a Dutch author, yeah, it's a Danish or a Dutch author. I'm sorry, I still confused between those two. Discomfort of Evening won an award. I think it was a Booker or something. It's not a Pulitzer, that much I know. It could be something else. But this is the best book you can read in fiction in maybe the past 5, 10 years. It's just so, carnal again, but in the way of food and all that. Now, if you are interested in African, and I did skip that when I said about the four scripts, because most languages that are spoken or written, African ones, are in Arabic or Latin, are colonial languages, which doesn't make sense at all. Yes, it doesn't. So I would say you would have to learn Ethiopic and Amharic alphabet, Ge'ez. Now, if you go ahead and take that kind of a plunge, you should appreciate learning a little bit of Tamil before that. You'd get to know that the Baluchis, the Elamites, the Arabs actually speak the same tongue to some extent, despite having become a different sect and all that kind of stuff. Book of Fizalgos, that's the name of a spiritual book approved by the Orthodox Christian Church of Ethiopia. It's one of the few divine books written by an African. Mark Danielewski, American contemporary author, extraordinarily dense set of volumes called The Familiar by him. Then there's this book called The House of Leaves. Again, that's so creepy kind of a book, and you love it. Arno Schmidt, German author. If you have the time, read him. There's a translation of it by Dalkey, Archive Press, American. Always, I'm sure by constraints of finance, they don't have enough money and all that. I try to donate when I earn some money, making a few dollars on this AI outlier kind of a stuff. So Arno Schmidt has been published by them. If you don't have the money, go to archive.org. You will find a free borrow version. Read it. There are two, three books by him. 100 Years Ago by Krishna Gupta. Again, diametrically opposite from Germans, India, Hindi. This is one of the few books that I'd recommend if you want to take on this Hindutva battle head on from the right side. Saptashil by Sitaram Goyal. I'm sorry if I'm getting to a vernacular, but Sitaram Goyal is well known to people like Conrad Els, David Frawley, and the typical hardline right wing, which hasn't been spoken of even by the current government. So Saptashil is one of the books on Buddhism actually, and it's written in Hindi. It's an extraordinary book. Alamiya Ka Karkhana by Mohsin Khan. Again, this is a very recent book. It won an award from Bank of Baroda. It's translated from Urdu into Hindi. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary book. That guy has just shown how all the Greek, all the Urdu can seep into Hindi so easily, and it'll take you into a wonderful dream. It's deeply, deeply touching. Trust me. Occult I Ching, Maja de Ost is a book on I Ching, Chinese divination. If you want to understand I Ching, the best books are actually John Minford, but that's a completely English book. This is by a Latin American author, Haiti maybe. I don't know. I don't remember that well because I haven't read that book completely. But yeah, it's a little materialistic interpretation because she's saying it's a divination of snakes. It's actually about jinns. I have written about this whole topic in my research papers, and I don't want to, publicize it in a podcast. So there it was. Please go through my Amazon list. You'll find all the books there. In case you don't find something, there's a Telegram channel. Just ping me for, whatever, and I will, take care of that, whatever it is, anything. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye. Please subscribe.